The rise of Nairobi and the construction of the Uganda Railway, also known as the Lunatic Express, are integral to understanding the economic and social transformation of Kenya. Here's a detailed account of this fascinating historical development. In the late 19th century, British colonial interests in East Africa were driven by strategic and economic considerations. The British sought to establish a railway to link the interior of East Africa with the Indian Ocean port of Mombasa, primarily to facilitate the transport of goods and support the colonization of Uganda. The construction had to get authority from the British Parliament. In August 1895, a bill was introduced at Westminster, becoming the Uganda Railway Act 1896, which authorized the construction of a railway from Mombasa to the shores of Lake Victoria. The aim, extending British influence and opening up the region for commerce and settlement. Before the railway's construction, the Imperial British East Africa Company had already begun a 970-kilometre ox cart track from Mombasa in 1890. Britain was party to a series of anti-slavery measures agreed at the Brussels Conference Act of 1890. At the time, slaves trafficking from the interior to the coast was rampant, and to disrupt this, the British proposed constructing a railway line from Mombasa to Uganda. With this steam-powered access, the British could transport people and soldiers to curb this trade while also ensuring dominance of the African Great Lakes region. Two birds, one stone. The Uganda Railway, named after its ultimate destination, spanned for 1,060 kilometres. This railway was a huge logistical achievement and became strategically and economically vital for both Uganda and Kenya. It also helped to bury slavery by removing the need for humans in the transport of goods. Construction began in Mombasa in 1896 and proceeded inland towards Lake Victoria, but was way more difficult than they had anticipated. First, the mosquitoes transmitted malaria to the Indian workers and British engineers. Dysentery, too, wreaked its own havoc on the railway workforce. The fact that there were no elaborate health establishments made it worse. As if diseases were not enough, the unpredictable terrain played a role in hindering progress of the construction process on numerous occasions. Work had to stop as the engineers plotted on the best approach to the numerous challenges posed by the unfriendly terrain. The Great Rift Valley was a daunting challenge to the construction. It required great innovation in order to maneuver past the Mammoth Challenge. Resistance and hostility from the inhabitants of the localities the line traversed was a constant roadblock throughout the construction period. The locals took great exception to the British engineers and Indian coolies, and carried out disruptions in an organized manner which extensively slowed down the pace of the construction. In expressing their distaste for the British engineers and Indian coolies, the locals would vandalize the laid sections of the line, loot the construction materials, and also carry out direct attacks on the construction workers. To minimize this hostility, the British rulers entered into peace treaties with the locals. On the other hand, the Indians set up shops and engaged in barter trade with the locals. These two initiatives softened the hard stance taken by the locals to a great extent. With time, the locals were also engaged in construction as unskilled labour. The incidents for which the building of the railway may be most known are the killings of a number of construction workers in 1898 during the building of a bridge across the Savo River. Hunting mainly at night, male lions stalked and killed at least 28 Indian and African workers, although some accounts put the number of victims as high as 135. Nicknamed the Lunatic Line due to its perceived folly and enormous cost, the railway faced a great deal of criticism in the British Parliament. The huge capital sums needed for the project made many sceptical of the value of the investment. This, coupled with the fatalities of the personnel constructing it through disease, local resistance, and hostile wildlife, led it to be dubbed a lunatic line. Construction began in Mombasa in 1896. At first, the locomotives were imported second-hand from India. Thereafter, they were manufactured and imported from Britain. However, a British strike in the locomotive industry in 1897 caused a complete cessation of supplies of spares and new locomotives. Once the strike was over, it was expected that normal business would resume to East Africa. However, reported high demand within Britain meant that the companies involved could not prioritise work abroad, and it quickly became evident that a different source would have to be found. Uganda Railway turned to the American market and purchased new locomotives from there. These engines were coal-burning. The coal was imported from South Africa. In 1903, wood fuel replaced coal since it was less expensive and readily available, although it produced more smoke. To ensure continuous supply of wood fuel for these locomotives, plantations of eucalyptus and other fast-growing trees were established. Nairobi's rise began with its selection as a railway depot in 1899. Located at a high-altitude area, it offered a cooler climate compared to the coastal areas, which was advantageous for European settlers. Its central location between Mombasa and the Lake Victoria made it a logical midpoint for administrative and logistical purposes. The name Nairobi itself comes from the Maasai expression meaning cool waters, referring to the cold water streams which flowed through the area. With the arrival of the Uganda Railway, the site was identified for a store depot and camping ground for the Indian labourers working on the railway. As the railway progressed, Nairobi quickly grew from a small depot to a bustling settlement. Key developments such as construction of basic infrastructure like housing, offices and supply depots led to an influx of workers, traders and administrators, which contributed to rapid population growth. By 1900, Nairobi had a diverse population of British colonialists, Indian labourers and local African communities. It became a hub for trade and commerce, attracting businesses that supplied goods and services to the railway project and its workers. The town's early years were, however, beset with problems of malaria, so much so that a few years later, doctors tried to have the whole town move to a healthier place. In 1907, Nairobi was officially declared the capital of the British East Africa Protectorate, replacing Mombasa. The city continued to expand, with the establishment of government buildings, schools, hospitals, and other essential services. This continued through World War II till independence, where it remained the capital. The rise of Nairobi, closely tied to the construction of the Uganda Railway, shows the transformative power of infrastructure and strategic planning. From its humble beginnings as a railway depot, Nairobi has grown into a major African metropolis, playing a central role in the region's economic, political, and cultural life.